Hello and welcome to Inside Out. My guest on this episode is one who's got a great privilege in that he can have a go at somebody like Virat Kohli, Rohit Sharma, and even Sachin Tendulkar, but he'll not get trolled. Such is the esteem he enjoys amongst his followers. I'm sure most of them will testify in a court of law that John Farnham wrote the song You're the Voice in his honor. Talking about the voice, my guest tonight is one who's known as the voice of cricket. It's my pleasure to present you Harsha Bhogle. Welcome, Harsha.
Thank you very much, Sir Woorkeri. As I don't know if it's known, but it's what you referred to all around the cricket world, Sir Woorkeri, Sir Raman, whatever. But the Sir always comes first.
Okay, you never let go of an opportunity, do you?
You talked about Sachin and all, it was okay, but modern generation, you can't have a go at anybody.
No, you enjoy that privilege. They account to every word of yours. You don't indulge much in criticism anyway, but whenever you do it, you don't get trolled like many other former cricketers do.
Because they carry the baggage of stats. I am free from the baggage of international records, you see. So sometimes it's a disadvantage and sometimes it's an advantage.
Okay, now let's get back to your start. Whenever we grew up, the times at which we grew up, we did two things. We breathed and we played cricket. When did the larva of cricket get into your system?
Okay, since you mentioned that, I've always wanted to ask you this. There was a camp, would have been early 82. Early 82, I mean, I know it's rude to ask you on your own program. How old were you in early 82?
I was 17 then.
I seem to remember, I don't know why, you and LS were at a camp at the Lal Bahadur Stadium. Would you have been around then at a camp at Lal Bahadur Stadium?
No, someone
told me boys, very good players there. We had come there for our inter-college final. And I think before that, your camp was on over there. I don't know. I just have this vague recollection. So
we were playing the Cooch Behar finals against Karnataka then.
Okay. So people had told me about two very good young players there. So I remember that. Yeah. See, I used to play. One of my biggest strengths was I knew just how good a player I was. I mean, I had to study in those days. Cricket was not a career. It would never have been because I wasn't good enough. But I played lower division, I played senior division, I played college, I played university, but I was also doing engineering at that time. By the way, good, proper test players from Tamil Nadu all do engineering, as you know very well, all from the time of Mr. Venkatraghavan. So we had to do all that. So luckily for me, what happened, was that I played enough cricket to fall in love with the game, to understand defeat and failure, to understand saying, shit, I just touched the ball. How did it go for 4? It was not supposed to. Oh, wow. And saying I can't score a run for the next 3 days and my leg breaks up, my googly is being spotted 3 days before I bowl it. So, but I went through all those emotions. But then, I mean, one day father said, why don't you try doing this? Hyderabad was a great place to grow up in. They gave a 19-year-old kid an audition. Who gives a 19-year-old kid an audition today? They gave me an audition. They gave me one game to do, only a few stints. It was Hyderabad versus Kerala. And the game was starting only after lunch. The commentary was starting only after lunch. So you got a break. The Hyderabad was a great place to grow up in. All India Radio was a very encouraging place at that time. So I got a break. The funny thing is, I never thought of it like that. I think I was doing commentary on a couple of Ranji Trophy games while I was still playing senior division cricket in Hyderabad. So I wonder how that went now that you ask me this.
Watching the Hyderabad team of those days, the flair and flamboyance, watching them take the field was a sight, wasn't it? Let alone watch them play.
Yeah, and actually the generation slightly before us, even more so, which is Jaisimha, Abbas Ali Beg. By the time we started watching that generation was just on its way out. But I'll tell you one thing. When we played against MCC, as it was called, the Maratpalli Cricket Club, it was ML Jaisimha, still playing. Long after he had retired, he would still turn up and play every Sunday morning, immaculately dressed. If you're playing against ML Jaisimha's team, you also had to be well dressed. Because, it was the class. And sometimes people from outside would come and play, but it was always 5 seniors and 6 kids playing for MCC. But what I remember was, that generation must have been something else. Okay? Because at lunch, he would open the boot of his ambassador and there was food and drink for everybody, including the opposition. And it must have been a great generation, but I think that style remained. Even if you see the later players, the Azharuddins, the Lakshmans. We are not even talking about people like Sultan Salim, Mumtaz Hussain, Abdul Hai of an earlier generation, Abdul Azim, and all the others afterwards. They're very watchable batsmen.
But having watched cricket from that era and to watch what is happening of late must be quite sad for you, because Hyderabad cricket is going only in one direction, isn't it, of late?
I mean, if you look over the years, at any given point, there was at least one player from Hyderabad in the national side, even after the glory days. I mean, I remember I was 10 years old. India went to West Indies in 1971. India went to England in 1971. There were 5 players from Hyderabad in that side. There was Krishnamurthy, there was Govindraj, Abid Ali, ML Jaisimha, Abbas Ali Beg. There were players like these. There were 5 players from Hyderabad in the national squad. But even after that, you had Azharuddin, you had VVS Lakshman, you had Venkatpati Raju. You always had somebody from Hyderabad in the national squad. No, I don't know how many people make the South Zone squad. So it's very sad. The senior division cricket was so well organized. We had A1, A2, B1, B2. You had leagues up to G. You had the zonals. You had the junior state. I don't know. Did you play the junior state for Tamil Nadu under 25? The Ramchandra Rao Trophy was an excellent tournament. You got a chance to show that you could play Ranji Trophy cricket or no. So it was very well organized, even though it might have been matting wickets largely in Hyderabad, but it was very well organized. So I feel very sad.
You were talking about commentating even as you were playing. Did you do Carlisle Best? You remember Carlisle Best?
No, I didn't, because I didn't bat long enough. I remember I didn't bat long enough to be able to do that. No, but it was funny that I actually took a tape recorder to one of my own games to do my audition. So while the openers are batting, you're probably a little younger, but you would still have seen those big tape recorders. The cassettes had just come that time. So I took a big cassette player in my kit bag and I went and I recorded commentary. No, I didn't do a Carlisle Best. But it was very funny. You wouldn't have played. He was around that time.
Yeah, much later. But it was interesting for me to read about it. Somebody commentating as he was batting. That must have been something.
So you've been a batsman. You played fast bowling. Do you have time to think about what you are going to say after your shot?
No, I didn't even mention to trying that, Arsha. Never mind, let alone doing it.
Yeah.
Chemical engineering and a management degree under your belt. But cricket was your calling. How did that happen?
Yeah. I mean, look, we are blessed to be in cricket. Cricket embraces some people. It's the greatest thing in the world. Cricket embraces people. So while I was doing engineering, I was still playing senior division. I'd still go for the evening nets and do after the practicals, go for evening nets, come back. My biggest regret is that we didn't have people at our nets to tell us what we were doing wrong. So we continued doing the same thing, enjoyed the game, and then went out of the playing side of the game. So I remember once asking Arshad Ayub at the nets. He was our captain for 3 years in senior division. I said, Arshad bhai, turn nahi ho raha ball. Kya karna utka turn nahi ho raha? And he said, aisa fast bhag ke aa rahe hain, time deo turn hone ko. So little things like that also we did not know. We learned by making mistakes as we went along. But getting into IIM was a lottery. It was, the number of people who write the test. Maybe I just had an interesting CV. I've often wondered why I got in. Because once I got in, I was in awe. I didn't think I belonged over there. The quality of the intellect of the people there, they're so sharp. By the time I'm reading a question, they're coming out with answers. And I said, where have I lost myself? How have I found myself here? So maybe it was because I had an interesting CV. Because I had studied French at graduate level. I'd done an advanced diploma in French. I played cricket for my university in Rohinton Baria. I'd done a little bit of commentary. I'd done decently. It was a very soft engineering course, very, very soft engineering course. But I'd done reasonably well in my engineering course. So maybe it was an interesting CV. But Ahmedabad was life-changing, game-changing experience for me. I walk through the gates today when I go back, and I bow and I walk through. It just was the making of you.
Radio commentary was the only possible avenue those days. Yeah. Very few slots to get into. How difficult was it to cross the threshold barrier?
Radio, see, luckily I got a break when I was very young. And as you also know, when you start very young, people say, "Bachcha hai mya." So if you made a mistake, it was okay. But there were some experiences that I've talked about that I'll tell you again, which were very important for me. The first thing I realized was there were a lot of senior commentators there. I was the kid. And I had only heard commentary. I'd never been at a game where a commentary was being broadcast. So when there's radio and no television, you're entirely at the mercy of the commentator in a sense, because he's your eyes and ears, everything. So if he says the ball was short of a length outside off, it is gospel. It is short of a length outside off. Now there I am listening to the commentators and watching the game, and I realized in the good old radio commentary there was an element of fiction. That was my first learning. I mean, I'm not degrading those commentators, but there was an element of fiction between a drive and a cut. It could be interchanged. But what radio did was it taught me two things. One is I was doing a game very early on, Hyderabad versus Saurashtra, and there was a temporary stand that was erected. We had to climb up the bamboo stand and whatever and do commentary from the top. But the audience below, and in those days, 5,000-10,000 people used to come to watch a Ranji Trophy game. So they were all listening to the commentary. If you made a mistake, they would look up, and you've been in Hyderabad long enough to know the language. They would look up and tell you what they thought of you. So you learned very quickly that making a mistake was not an option. And actually, if you do radio commentary, for people like you, radio commentary is excellent because it allows you to talk, to tell a story, but you cannot go wrong in radio commentary because you're not drawing conclusions. You're only describing the action. So if you describe the action honestly, you cannot go wrong. That is what I learned in radio. If I have to say, should this man have gone on the front foot or should he be on the back foot waiting given the bounce of the ball, I could be right or wrong. But if I say he went on the front foot, I cannot be wrong, right? If I say cover is a little straighter, if I say point is a little backward, I cannot go wrong because I'm telling the truth as I see it. So I learned these little disciplines on radio. It's a beautiful way to start. And because I was young, I made a lot of whatever mistakes we made were okay. And I realized afterwards the people with me were actually making more.
Money definitely wouldn't have been the motivating factor for you to continue and carry on with commentating then.
No, because we used to get 100, I think for a long time it was 100 rupees. 100 rupees a day. Even when I started doing some international games, it was 100, 150 rupees a day. Daily allowance was 75 rupees a day. So if you get a game in a city where you knew cousins, those cousins suddenly became your long lost family because you had to stay with them. Or if you had a friend, you had to go and stay with a friend because you couldn't stay anywhere in that kind of money. So it was strictly amateur. But it was good fun. It could not have been a career. In fact, even Doordarshan, after I started doing a few games on Doordarshan, could not be a career till TWI came to India in 1993, the Hero Cup.
I'll come to that. Yeah. Australia has a special place in your heart, especially very much so. You got your first assignment in that particular series.
First big assignment, yeah. I'd done a little bit before. I'd done 2 or 3 test matches, but in those days you did one test match every 2-3 years because everyone got a break, right? There were long, big panels. But I had done, luckily for some reason, I'd done a Ranji final, which was the one that Bengal won against Delhi, or the quotient rule and all, remember?
Yeah.
I'd done a Duleep Trophy game straight after the Pakistan tour when Azharuddin became captain. So for some reason, my father, who took more interest in my performances than me, he had kept clippings. Every time you made 20 in Deccan Chronicle, your name came in the paper. So he had kept those cuttings, and he had kept a recording of my commentary, which I could send to Australia. It was an eye-opener. In Australia, the first thing I learned is what a great team sport broadcast is, where people are helping each other. For example, I was talking about some game, and Jim Maxwell quickly opened his... In those days, you didn't have databases, right? So Wisden had a scorecard of every game that was ever played. He promptly opened that and put it in front of me so I could refer to it while doing commentary. And I said, wow, this looks good. And I discovered in Australia as well that if your style is to give as you get, they would also come hard at you. They're saying, you Indians are soft. And you don't want to do this. And then you give it back to them, you earn respect. So I enjoyed my time in Australia because you could have free banter without people judging you as a person. I found that to some extent in England, where there was still people, Lords and all were terrible, terrible, terrible experiences. But you always got the feeling that there's a bit of that when you went to England early on in my career. But Australia was never that. I mean, I never experienced anything. They accepted you, was great. And even today, I find that Australia is far more open to an alternate point of view. They might make fun of your point of view and come hard at you, But you're allowed your alternate point of view, and you can come hard at them. And the other day, I'm on Fox, and I said, I've never seen Australia's batting so insipid. And that's cool. So that is what I enjoy about Australia.
The advent of satellite television completely changed the dynamics, didn't it?
It did. It did, because it allowed you to have a profession. Z was the first channel that came in. Then the foreign networks started to come in. And then ESPN came in 94, 95. So before that, TWI had come in. And TWI came in with a UK background. So if they picked you as a commentator, the first thing that happened was you got the entire series to do. Not only one test match or one day international per series. So you could draw the connect between what you were doing. And there was a certain, the telecast was organized well. I remember I got, when they called me for the Hero Cup, they paid me $100 a day. Okay? And one of my friends told me, you should never work for that kind of money. I said, are you nuts? I said, don't tell them that I would pay them $100 to get the opportunity to do that. But I said, they're putting me up in Taj Bengal, man. I said, this must be a great gig because they're putting me up in Taj Bengal. I said, can you imagine? They're giving me daily allowance, Taj Bengal. This seems like a good career. But what that did was it allowed us to work with very good producers and directors who would then tell you, listen, just be careful of this, just be careful of that. For example, I had a bad habit then, which I still do, which is I speak too fast sometimes. The more confidence you get, the more measured is your broadcast. It's like a batsman who's afraid of the ball. He wants to play too many shots. So I would also speak too fast. They pointed that out to me. Then whenever I'm on air, the producer would just say, breathe to me. So I learned a lot being with these people, which a lot of commentators who came up through the Doordarshan era were not able to learn. So luckily for me, satellite television came at the right time in my career.
Commentating on radio and television are two different things. Which do you find most difficult?
Oh, television. Radio is very, very simple. As I said, radio is much easier. See, it's like always talking more is easier than talking less. Because talking less means you have to be relevant at all times. It's like driving with your foot on the brake, especially in India, where you constantly have a lot of commercial involvement and you have to go to a break as soon as the last ball is bowled. So you have to learn to say in 10 words, 15 words. In radio, you have 25, 30 words. You can have a conversation. Suppose I'm chatting with you and I want to talk to you about one of your best batting performances I saw, which was in the final of the 96 Ranji Trophy, Tamil Nadu-Karnataka game. You opened the batting against Srinath and Prasad. So suppose I'm talking to you about that. I just have to refer to the ball. Suppose for example, Bumrah is bowling and I'll say, Bumrah, shot outside of batsman, lets it go. And we can continue the story. There's so much room for storytelling in radio, which you don't have in television. So radio is much easier than television.
But the flip side is that even a silence of 5 seconds is a long duration there, isn't it?
It is. Whereas in television, the good old days when Benno was the torchbearer of television, they almost demanded silence because the game has a soundtrack of its own. You know, when you're taking guard and you scratch with your spikes, there's a soundtrack of that. When the ball hits the bat, there's a sound that it makes. The bowler grunts at delivery. So the game has its own sounds, which in the past used to be encouraged. That the commentator doesn't speak, he lets the sounds of the game go on. The ball thuds into the keeper's glove, it makes a different sound. So now we have become a soundtrack. Largely, I think that's what audience tastes require. So we are told we have become a soundtrack. On radio, yeah. 5 seconds of silence is an eternity.
Have you at times felt the radio commentator in you coming to the fore while doing on television?
Are you gently saying I talk too much on television? No,
not at all. Not at all. Because I've not done radio. I've done television commentary. So I'm just more curious about that aspect.
When you're doing both on the same day, yes. Because if you're switching from one radio box to the other, I mean, I remember I went from a television booth to the ABC radio commentary booth when I was in Australia. And I just started pausing and I said, oh, no, hang on. You got to describe what happened on the ball. You don't have to just pause because the ball went to cover and there was a fielder. So you have to keep adapting all the time. So if you're doing both on the same day, it's like playing on a turning track at one end and a bouncy track at the other. And every over you're trying to adapt. For someone like me, who came from radio, yes, it took time to adapt. And even for a long time, because I felt I needed to prove myself every time, I didn't have a batting or a bowling average to add weight to what I was saying. I felt I needed to do a little bit more, but I hope in course of time that's come down a little bit. But yeah, that is your DNA. That's in my DNA.
Mark Nicholas had written in his book that he felt his throat go dry, his knees buckle when he found himself in the midst of former captains initially. Did you ever have that kind of a feeling?
No. For some reason, no, never. In that, I was always very acutely aware of where I stood. I knew what my Lakshman Rekha was. With Mark, it's a little different because Mark was a regular first-class cricketer. He had captained a county side. He had played alongside a Greenwich, a Richards, a Marshall, a Roberts. So he was a first-class cricketer of decent standing. He wasn't the greatest in the world, but a first-class cricketer of decent standing. So, whereas I was not in that category. Even Alan Wilkins has played 7, 8, 10 years of first-class cricket. So I knew my Lakshman Rekha very well. So I was never hassled. I mean, there was a bit of awe initially, but you realize very quickly that you have a role to play. They have a role to play. I'm not challenging them or I'm not coming in their way. So because I knew what I could not do, and I was very acutely aware of not transgressing into territories that I did not have any credibility. So you'll find even today, I never talk about whether the left elbow is high enough or no, whether the back lift is coming down from point or from first slip or from second slip. I don't talk about that because the moment I do that, I lose my credibility. So no, to cut a long story short, I did not feel that way. With a couple of commentators, because of their stature, but also because of the way you feel about them, there was a little bit with Michael Holding, there was, but he was so nice to me that he didn't let that affect for too long. He's just a lovely person. So that went away very quickly. With Boycott, you were always a little careful because if you made a mistake, he didn't let it pass. He pounced on it. But that was good in the sense that therefore you had to be extra careful when you were with them. So that didn't happen. The only time I've been completely awestruck and not knowing how I'm going to do was actually an interview that I did, not on a live broadcast. I used to do a program called Harsha Online. And this is after so many years of experience. Tiger Pataudi was in the studio.
Oh, sorry.
Some people carry that aura around them, right? Viv Richards carries an aura of a certain kind. Tiger, without saying much, there was that aura around him. And he was so down to earth when I spoke to him, but he gave very short answers. So I was gaping a little bit, and the answer would finish. Oh, sorry, I've got to ask another question as well, because he was very economical with his words. So that was the only time I said I was a little bit in awe of Tiger. He was a great man.
He was economical, but he conveyed a lot with few words.
He did.
I found that whenever I interacted with him.
Yeah.
Over decades, you'd have seen a lot of characters in the game. Do you think that breed is slowly becoming extinct?
The first challenge to that breed, funnily, came with a helmet. Because without the helmet, you could see the person. No? So, for example, occasionally Dhoni bats without the helmet. There is so much more to him when he bats without the helmet. Or when Kohli pulls on a cap, there's so much more to him. I think this will reappear as social media becomes more and more pronounced. All of today's players are cricketers and social media entities. So you see, Yuzvendra Chahal, for example, is a character because you see him on Instagram. So that is coming back. But there was a generation of tough good boys in our cricket. They were tough players, but they were good boy players. Rahul Dravid, good boy. VVS Lakshman, good boy. Anil Kumble, good boy. Javagal Srinath in his own way, good boy. I'm not saying only players from the South, but these are players that I related to because I've always considered myself South Indian. So these were good boys. They were not, you didn't look at them and say, what outrageous thing is he going to do next? Like say Vinod Kambli would do.
The code of conduct is okay up to a point, but do you think that is kind of preventing the characters displaying their wit and pranks?
It could be. It could be. I've not thought about it that much, certainly from the player's point of view. Also, we have too many breaks in India, so you don't get to see that as much. You see that, as I said, in their Instagram pages. But who are the pranksters? Say, when you were playing, who were the pranksters when you were playing? Also, see, in those days, there was not that much television. So there could be pranksters and get away with it. Today, if you carry out a prank or you do something funny on television, for the next 3 days, it is on every social media site in the world. And then people have a comment. So maybe they're holding back a little, I don't know.
Witt was brilliant with some of them. I can recall an instance where Eldin Baptiste was bowling to Gus Logie in a charity game. Gus Logie hits him for a 4 and then next 3 bounces. So Gus Logie walks down the track. He says, "Soaks, it's only a charity game, man. Give me something to drive." So Baptiste says, "I won't even give you my car to drive, man." So those exchanges are not happening. Are they happening?
Increasingly, there is a temptation to keep the stump mics up as part of coming close to the game. You'd see the cameras also. Earlier, when a shot was played, the cameras would pull back. Today, the cameras are so powerful that the cameras are come very close to the action. We can lip read very easily what people are saying, and the stump mics are up. So if you say something, for example, the other day, Aaron Finch hit a shot. You know how it is. You want to punch out the back foot and it hits high on the pad, or you've not timed it, and you say something to yourself, right? Say you are batting outside. You want to say something to yourself, but stump mic picked that up. It was an expletive. It was a gali, but it was to himself for not having played the right shot. But that goes on the stump mic everywhere. So maybe people are becoming a little more careful. I mean, I won't buy. I mean, I think we have to draw a line between disappointment and verbal abuse. So suppose I'm saying something to myself. I've run in and I bowled a short ball, and I'm actually angry with myself. And I say something to myself, whatever, that goes on the stump mic. And so we've got a situation now where Kagiso Rabada actually got a demerit point that led to a ban because he said something in frustration, not aimed at the batsman. He was not telling the batsman, "This is what I think of you," but it was something said in frustration, but was picked up by the mics. So yeah, to some extent that is happening.
Prior to the ICC match referee coming into play, the umpires used to handle all these situations. Yes. It was interesting, umpires had to look after not only the way things were going on the field, the laws of the game, they had to even control the players. It was interesting those days.
I still think it should be like that. I remember Venkatraghavan told me a story about how the umpire's job was to control things. And he said with Australia, actually, he said he never had a problem with Australia because he would just tell Mark Taylor, while passing at the end of an over, "Mark, I think it's getting little out of hand." And Mark told him, he said, "Skipper, my responsibility, umpire, my responsibility, don't worry." And he said, so that was the way we did it with the players. And that's why I think, as you will also realize, you know better, you were more comfortable with umpires who in their own jolly way told you, "Listen, stop it now." I think the umpires still have a role to play in that. But as we've seen with India, Australia, everybody's friends, man. Now there are no rivals anymore. The IPL has come and it's like a file. It just smoothened up all the rough edges, and now everybody is friends and Instagram followers.
Talking of umpiring and umpires, do you think their roles are getting diluted with each passing year? Are you happy with it?
I think we are riding a tiger on that. My gut feel is we are riding a tiger on that. So it will only go more and more. So it's interesting that I was in favor of the umpire not looking down for the front foot no ball. Because I always thought that the umpire, he's standing about 8 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet back from the crease, 6 feet back at least from the crease. And there's another 4.5 feet to the front crease. So he's looking for the no ball about 8 to 10 feet further away, which is always difficult. When a fast bowler is bowling, it's even more difficult to judge because of the foot is going that quickly. And as one umpire told me, he said, people have open-chested actions. They're coming like this, open-chested action. He said the right shoulder is coming in the way sometimes of me checking the no ball. So I was always in favor of umpire doesn't have to look down for the no ball, because then he also has to look up and he doesn't have enough time to go up to look for the LBW. But Simon Toffel told me, no, he said, it's been like that for 100 years. Why are you making laws for poor umpiring? So their perspective was different. I'm quite happy with the line call looking at the no ball, because the first thing I asked a player was, have you ever benefited in your stroke play from a no ball being called? So from the moment we went from back foot no ball to front foot no ball, you've been a player. Did you ever adjust your shot and get advantage because someone called a front foot no ball? So there's no advantage. You can call that no ball 2 seconds later, 3 seconds later, it doesn't matter. So I was in favor of that actually. But more and more, yes, the line calls will go away from the umpire with the referrals. The umpire doesn't have the sanctity anymore, so definitely it is, his role is reducing.
The way things are going, umpires even feel they might probably not get replaced by technology in the future.
Look, what all are the umpire's roles now? If the umpire doesn't have to call a no ball, that is gone away from him. If you say infinite referrals, then the game will come to a halt, but technology will tell you whether someone is out LBW or no. So I hope it doesn't happen, because I think the umpire's job is also to control the passage of play. And there are some very strange rules that you and I never know, which only the umpire knows because that's his job to know. So I guess in those situations you will need an umpire. For example, I had no idea about what happened in the World Cup final, that if the throw has already started, then the overthrows don't count or something like that. We don't know all these rules. There are these tiny footnotes that say lawyers know in the constitution and umpires know about the laws of the game.
So, which brings us to the question now. Technology might even sort of obliterate the human element in sport. Will it rob the sheen of the sport?
I don't think so. I mean, in terms of a contest between bat and ball, no, never. Even though the batsman is far better informed about the bowler and the bowler is far better informed about the batsman than ever before, by the stats and analysis that the analysts are throwing up. So he will say that 65% of the time you bowl on a length outside off, this is where he will bowl. But I think what analytics is telling us is what is the best way to bowl to W.V. Raman. One, to keep him quiet. Two, to get him out. But the bowler still has to bowl that ball, no? There is still the human element of error in the ball that you're bowling, the human element of error in the shot making that is there. So analytics is helping us understand the game a lot better, but it will never take over the... I hope bowlers don't say, I will only do what the analyst is telling me to do.
I was referring to that in terms of the umpiring mistakes that can happen.
Yeah.
Technology sort of, ensuring that, umpiring mistakes are kind of overruled and perfection is achieved.
Yeah. See, what we are doing now in the India-Australia series, because there are home country umpires, there's no third country umpires here, we've gone to 3 DRSs. So DRS, which was supposed to eliminate the howler, is now being used as a tactical tool. I mean, I'm a number 6 batsman, and I still have 3 referrals left. I know I'm out, but look, after me, just 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, why waste the referral? Chalo, chance leke dekhte hai. So DRS is slowly becoming like that, which is a bit of a worry. But 3 referrals, I think it's too many. If you have more than 3, the game will keep stopping all the time.
Harsha Ki coach happened a few years back. What was the criteria? What was the criteria the next Harsha was supposed to meet?
I'll tell you something very interesting. This was a program that came from ESPN USA. It was called The Dream Job. But the producer was an Aussie, said, if I do the dream job in India, people won't know what it is. So how do they know what we are looking for? So that's why they put the name. I couldn't sleep at night one night. I'll be honest, I couldn't sleep at night thinking they're naming a show after me, man. Wow, I must have done something correct in life. But it was very difficult job. It was very, very difficult because they were training people to be anchors, not commentators. They were training people to be anchors, but they also had to pass a commentary test. So in 2004 in Dhaka, in Chittagong, they actually did commentary on an international game. They had 5, 10 minute stints to do commentary on that. They were looking for a presence before the camera. They were looking for a calmness and an ability to stick to the script and be able to handle different situations. The ability to conduct interviews. I remember Murli Karthik was one of the persons. Rathod was R.S. Rathod was the union minister. The shooter was one of the people. So you had to ask them how to. They were tested on how to do interviews. So testing your presence of mind, testing your ability to edit and present a story, do voiceovers. That was what it was, but it grew very difficult. The guys, I promise you, the 7, 8 guys who came out were almost ready to become reporters at a cricket match.
You're on the board of one of the IIM institutions. Are you happy with the spreading out of the IIM entities?
Look, if you've come from a school where background where there were only 3 IIMs and then they became 4 and then they became 6, you value the brand very deeply. I mean, for us, I mean, I'll be very honest with you, that is my test cap. I can never get another cap. My only playing cap was my university cap. So for me to say I have done something in life, that was my test cap. So obviously you don't want the test cap to get diluted. The problem in education in India at the moment, with the pay scales and the amount of research that is being done, is the quality of the staff. So we have 20 IIMs now. I'm board of IIM Udaipur. Luckily, it's an outstanding director at IIM Udaipur. He's trying to do a lot of stuff. My wife is on the board of IIM Jammu, for example. So they're doing something else. But the quality of the teaching staff has always got to keep pace with the brand name. And I think that is a struggle. That is a struggle sometimes. So I think if you want to have an elite institution, then it's fine. Like you have IITs and you have NITs, right? The word RECs. You know, there was an REC in Warangal, REC in Trichy, all these places. There was an IIT, there was an REC. I don't mind that. RECs were not bad. They're called NITs now. They're not bad. They're good engineering colleges, but they're not IITs. It's like saying that in India and there's a Duleep Trophy. If you're a Duleep Trophy player, you're a good player. You may not be an India player, but you're still a good player to play Duleep Trophy. I would have liked it to be like that. I would like it to have been capped at 7, 8, 10 IIMs, maybe at most, and have another level of management colleges just below that.
What about the curriculum? Is it updated? Is it contemporary? Or is the same spin that's being carried on?
No, it has to be. And I mean, when I passed out of IIM Ahmedabad, in our second year, we had to select 13 courses. We had about 30, 35 courses to choose from. Now, I believe there's hundreds of courses. There's some lovely new courses that are coming out. The IIMs are becoming mindful of the fact that people will handle a lot of stress when they get into corporate jobs. So people are now trying to find courses on wellness, on happiness, on handling stress. I believe that there should also be courses on physical well-being, if not courses in awareness of physical well-being as well. So we are getting different kinds of courses. There's no doubt there's a big emphasis on entrepreneurship these days. When we were getting out of management school, entrepreneurship means they said, are you mad? You won't get a salary. You know, for all of us who came from a very middle-class household, the salary was sacrosanct. You know, it was like the Ganpati idol. The salary your parents brought home was like, defined everything in life. So becoming an entrepreneur was frowned upon. Today, they're actually encouraging people. At IIM Ahmedabad, there's a seed fund for the best projects. The industries funding them. So there is a definite shift away. I think we need more of that in engineering colleges. But in management schools, I think to some extent it is starting to happen. But I think it's a very interesting topic for two people largely in the world of cricket to be talking about. Not bad. Well done. I also have a few questions for you, by the way. So tell me when you're ready.
Okay. If you were to create a batsman, picking the top quality of the top 5 batsmen you've seen so far in your broadcasting career, what will that batsman be? What will that creation be?
I have a weakness towards people who take on who can play shots. As I said, I referred to one innings of yours. I think you must have hit 10 boundaries in your 50, I think, that day. And Srinath and Prasad were at their peak. And so that is why I remember that innings, because you took on the bowling. So you look on Azharuddin, you look on Lakshman, you look at Tendulkar before the injury started to affect him. You know, as the injury started to affect him, he became a slightly different kind of player. You have enormous admiration for Rahul Dravid, but he didn't make you sit on the edge of your seat. You admired him, but when Lakshman came to bat, you were on the edge of your seat. You need different kinds of players as well. But I find that the people who make the game look easy are the most difficult to categorize. Because you don't know if they're making the game look easy because the bowling is bad, or they're making genuine good bowling look ordinary or look not that good because of the quality of their batsmanship. So you tend to look at how one player is playing the same ball versus another. But yeah, I mean, when we were growing up, anybody who could play the on drive was like, wow, player. Because Hyderabad, everyone played those wristy shots. If you could hit an on drive, you would say, on drive, kya mara bhai?
Kya jabardast khelta une.
And in our time, if you could play the pull shot, because Indian batsmen traditionally did not play the pull shot that much. If you could play the pull shot, so players were respected because they stood up to fast bowling. I think that era is gone. Today, virtually everyone stands up to fast bowling.
10 teams in IPL. Would there be too many, or would it be all right?
I think it is inevitable. This year's IPL was very interesting in that it was played off season, and you still got the full complement of 60 games in, and viewership went through the roof. So if you are playing 10 teams and every team has to play every other team, I don't like the idea that we had in 2010-11, which I didn't like at all, where you play 5 teams home and away and 4 teams only once, because you're still trying to get to 60. That it's difficult for people to understand. Everyone team plays every other team. It's easy to understand. So if you can continue getting the best international players and play an IPL over 3 months, the viewership per game will drop, but I have no doubt that the gross viewership will go up. It's a question more of philosophy than anything else. Do you see country versus country as the pinnacle of sport? Or do you see franchise versus franchise as the most attractive form of sport? Football has answered that question. You get a Football World Cup, you get once in 4 years. You get a European Cup once in 2 years. But Messi is Barcelona. He's occasionally Argentina, right? But Messi is Barcelona. Cristiano Ronaldo, well, he was Real, he was Man United, he was then Portugal. Are we willing to accept today that Virat Kohli is RCB first? In cricket, that will take some time. So I think I'm okay with 10 teams as long as we can generate that amount of ability. I'd still like it to be 4 Indian players because it's finally an Indian league and you have to uplift families and Indian players. So I'm okay with 10 teams, everyone playing everyone else.
Finally, your word of advice for the aspiring Bogleys out there.
No, I mean, I hate to sound like a harbinger of doom, but increasingly today people are looking at former players who can do the job. So all I would advise them is, first of all, get comfortable in front of camera, be minimum bilingual if not trilingual, because see, if you're not an international player, the bar is set higher for you than it is for somebody else, and you've got to work twice as hard as anybody else, and you've got to get a niche. So can you do English and Hindi? Can you do English and Tamil? Can you do Tamil and Malayalam? Can you be professionally bilingual? So see what has happened now. Tamil is going through the roof. The viewership is going up, which you would never have expected that you could have a virtually full-time Tamil commentator. And that is fantastic because people are now getting to hear the broadcast in the language they understand. So professionally bilingual, workably trilingual is something I've been saying for 10 years. And be multimedia. You have to be able to write and face the camera. So a lot of journalists of the past were petrified of the camera. So I always tell young journalists, get friendly with the camera very quickly. The camera is not an enemy. The camera is only truthful. Like the mirror, it always tells the truth. So get used to what the camera is showing. Be comfortable before the camera and be versatile. You have to do 180 characters. You have to be able to do 500 words. You have to be able to do an interview. You have to be able to do a blog because you don't have the option. If you score 10,000 runs, you're a Rahul Dravid. You can sit in the commentary box and say, I think that shot was bad, because there's a weight of performance saying it. We cannot say that. So we have to be more versatile. We have to work harder. Start as a reporter, start doing blogs, start writing articles. At least you've got something to show to people. But increasingly today, your ability to get a break will not come from print or from audio, but from how good you are in front of the camera. And for heaven's sake, don't try to be a performer. Don't try and go, yeah, man, dude. No, don't. There is still room for earnest, believable people on television. Trust takes a long time to build. Never play with trust. And then if you can get a break, great. Now I'm going to ask you questions.
You are a polyglot yourself. How many languages do you speak?
Fewer now than when I was in Hyderabad, because my father taught French and we had to study French, and I did ISc in French and an advanced diploma. I could speak French fairly well. You could drop me in the middle of France, I could get by. So I could speak obviously English, Hindi. Marathi was not that good. It's got better since I came to Bombay. Hyderabadi Hindi, which is a different dialect completely, but I could speak very fluent Telugu. Today my Telugu is very rusty. హైదరాబాద్ లో ఉండేటప్పుడు చాలా బాగా మాట్లాడండి తెలుగు నేను, కానీ ఎప్పుడెప్పుడు ఇంగ్లీష్ రోజు వచ్చేస్తాయి. మరి యాక్సెంట్ కూడా చాలా చేంజ్ అయిపోయింది. చేంజ్ చెప్పాను నేను. When I was in Hyderabad, instead of change, I would have a Telugu word for it. So that happens. I noticed you speak a couple of lines of Telugu as well.
There's it, yes, my time is over. You might be feeling that it's like going to a stag party and finishing off with just one drink. That's all I have time for. And Ashraf Bokle, as you know, is a busy man. Now it's
No,
all up
Rama,
to
my
him.
question.
Yeah,
My
I'm going to take it. From my end, it's over.
Okay. No, I remember 2, 3 things about you. You said something to me once in Sri Lanka that I remembered for a long time. I think you were on that tour to Sri Lanka in '93, and there weren't too many side games. So you were not able to break into the side on that particular tour. So you went, what, 6 weeks without a game? 6, 7 weeks without a game? And we met in Colombo in the lobby or somewhere, and you said to me, suppose your newspaper sends you to cover a series and says you will not send back a single word, how will you feel? You're sent on the tour, but you don't report even one word. And I thought, yeah, I mean, we always think that getting picked for India, going on tour is such a wow experience. You told me, no, there are other frustrations, there are other things that come with it as well. But my question to you was, when did you stop being a bowler and become a batsman? Because I always thought of you as a left-arm spinner who batted. Next thing I know, I'm covering a test match in Chennai and you're batting at number 3.
Yeah, it all happened overnight. The thing was that playing in the English leagues did not help me, develop as a bowler. Then what happened was I realized why it happened now, but it's too late. I developed a kind of a technical flaw in my action, which meant that I was constantly getting back problems when I continued bowling. There was nobody to sort of rectify it or pick the change that happened in my bowling action. I could bat, and as it happened in Rajkot, Jimmy Amarnath, I think, was indisposed at the last minute. So Ravi was suddenly looking for somebody to bat at 3. He came up to me and asked me, "Would you do it?" I said, without blinking, I said, "Yes, I would do that," because it was better to get a game rather than be fussy about what you want to be, where you want to be.
So were you happy ending up as a top order batsman, or would you have still liked to be a middle order batsman who bowled?
I think I would have done far better in the middle order, because my case was trying to do a crash course of what you learn over a period of, let's say, 10, 15 years by way of experience. I was trying to do a crash course because I became a batsman overnight in international cricket. Mentally, I was not like that. Attitudinally, I was not a batsman. I never started my career as a batsman when I was at the junior level, so that you have that certain skills and qualities in you, and you're programmed that way, which meant that I had to sort of learn everything all at once in a shorter span of time. And every net session of mine was like trying to do a 3-year degree course in one day.
Yeah, which brings me to my next question to you. Does that help you in your career as a coach? The fact that you had to you have to adapt and learn. And what are your views on women's cricket? Because I'm really bullish about women's cricket. I've seen more and more girls to play cricket. I think we should open up, get more women to play. And that's why I'm a big supporter of a women's IPL. My theory has always been, you start, because somewhere you've got to start. You can't wait for the talent to come. Start with 6 overseas players for 2 years, go to 5 overseas players for 2 years, and then see if you've got the base developed. But I want to ask you what your thoughts on the women's game are, and therefore how did your playing career help? Does it help you in your coaching?
It does help me a lot, because I can see the various gamut of emotions that a player goes through, and the struggles they go through, and I can probably detect the pitfalls they're likely to encounter, because I've seen over a period of time a lot of cricketers going through different stages of their careers, handling the way they handled their careers, and I've had my own issues during my playing days. So this is a case of you having developed a kind of a library in a way, from which you draw when you try and help these cricketers who are under your charge. And coming to women's cricket, I'm sure in another 4 or 5 years, India will be a major force, because what they have done in the last 2-3 years gives us a lot of encouragement. It also gives a lot of self-belief to the other girls who are possibly thinking of taking up cricket. If and when the IPL happens for these girls, I'm sure that will also skyrocket. But the trick is in ensuring that it becomes a major brand the day it comes into inception, like how the IPL happened. Because what happens, how people react, how things are. Once you start the IPL, it gets off to a tepid start. Then people start getting doubts. There'll be mixed views. There'll be a lot of room for confusion. So that's the reason I maintained when it is started, even if it started a bit late or maybe 2-3 years down the line, it has to be done in such a manner. It has to be started at a time when it really takes off and never looks back.
My view is I don't like velocities and supernovas and Armageddon and these galaxy names. The reason I want 8 teams in the women's IPL, even if it means more overseas players, is a girl playing for, say, Smriti Mandhana is playing for RCB. Smriti Mandhana will become a star because the entire RCB machinery will promote her. You will get a ready-made fan base. Right? Suppose there's a young girl, say Shafali Verma has made it now, but suppose there's a young girl about to break in, is playing for Mumbai Indians. Straight away, you may not get the same audience, but the Mumbai Indians fan base will start accepting you. And tomorrow you can have better coaching systems and the fan base will get established. That's why I want all 8 teams. But I have only one more question for you before I finish, because I know our roles are slightly reversed today. I think the Aussie coach said something very interesting about coaching girls as opposed to coaching, say, New South Wales, where he was a coach. He said, when you're sitting there and you're talking to the team, he said, with guys, they always think, yeah, he's probably telling the other guy. He's probably telling that guy. When you say that we need to do better, we need to be quicker between the wickets, or we need to show more intent, so the guys will think, yeah, he's probably telling that guy. So the girls take it more personally. They think it's about me. And so the communication is very different when it's targeted at a women's team than it is at a guy's team. I don't know if you felt that. I just found that an interesting insight. So I thought I would check with you.
It definitely is different because it is also related to the relative experience of the guys and the girls. Now, for example, a guy starts playing representative cricket from the age of 14 if he's picked for under 16. So by the time he's come to 20 years of age, he's got 6 years of solid experience of playing competitive cricket, going through the grind and being subjected to the rough and tumble of people treating him badly, perhaps in some places. Whereas the girls used to be a case, at least in India, where they played under 19. If they did well, they were catapulted to the senior level. And within a short span of time, couple of good games at the senior level, they'll be made to play international cricket. So that kind of experience they lack does not, sort of make it easy. You take it for granted that they're supposed to know certain things at a certain level, especially if you're handling the Indian women's team. You think, oh, they're supposed to know this. No, they're not supposed to know that. For the simple reason, they have not garnered as much experience as guys do by the time they get to either a India A level or the senior Indian team.
Okay, fair call, fair call. It's something I hadn't realized. So see, finally, however hard you try to ask me questions, in my DNA is to ask questions. So I finally came back to that.
It's all right. It's a fair deal, Harsha. Not to worry. Yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot for spending your time during a series when you're really busy, and hope to catch up with you in person soon.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Cheers, Harsha.
Cheers. Bye.
There it was, the voice of cricket, sharing his views and also getting back to his job that he does so well and he's been doing so many years of asking me questions. I hope he enjoyed the chat, but I'm sure that there's a lot more that can be discussed when the person happens to be Harsha Bhogle with you. But that's all it is. It's a case of the constraint of time. I hope you will be with me the next time as well. Until then, stay safe and stay healthy.